"Don't talk and just follow me," the curvy waitress told the mafia boss without any explanation. He followed, but seconds later his whole world flipped, and now neither of them can walk away from what comes next. The night Ronan Vescari almost died, he was thinking about pasta. Specifically, the Tagliatelle at Portofino, the only restaurant in the harbor district that still made it the old way by hand, dried over wooden rods the way his grandmother used to. He had not eaten since morning. He had not slept properly in 3 days. And as his black sedan rolled to a stop outside the waterfront restaurant, the only thing occupying the mind of the most feared man in the city was whether the kitchen had saved him the last portion. That was the thing people never understood about Ronan Vescari. They imagined him constantly surrounded by tension, reading threat reports at the dinner table, sleeping with one eye open, barking orders into phones at midnight. And yes, all of that was true. But in the small spaces between the violence, he was remarkably ordinary. He liked good food, he preferred quiet rooms, he read history books, he remembered birthdays. None of that made him soft. It just made him human, which was perhaps the most dangerous thing about him. His driver pulled up to the curb at exactly 8:47 p.m. The meeting was scheduled for 9. A private dining room in the back of the restaurant, arranged through trusted contacts to discuss something that had been bothering Ronan for weeks. A quiet leak somewhere inside his organization. Money disappearing from accounts it had no business touching. Shipments rerouted without authorization. Small things, individually. Together, a pattern. Someone was betraying him. He stepped out of the car. The harbor air was cold and sharp, carrying the smell of salt and diesel, and faintly, behind it, the warmth of garlic drifting from Portofino's open kitchen. His 2 bodyguards fell into position, one ahead, one at his left shoulder. Ronan straightened his coat and moved toward the entrance. That was when the doors burst open. She came out fast, too fast, like someone who had been pacing behind that door, working up the courage to move, and had finally just decided to go. She was in her waitress uniform, dark apron still tied at the waist, dark hair half escaped from its clip. Her eyes found him immediately, which was strange because she had no reason to know who he was. She crossed the short distance between them in 4 quick steps and grabbed his arm, not lightly. Both hands' fingers wrapped around his forearm, a grip that meant business. His bodyguards moved instantly. One stepped forward with a hand raised, the other reached inside his jacket. But she did not even look at them. She looked only at Ronan. "Don't talk," she said, low and level. "Follow me right now." Her voice was not panicked. It was something worse. It was controlled in the way that people only get when they are absolutely terrified and forcing themselves to function. Anyway, Ronan had seen that expression before. He had worn it himself. His bodyguard grabbed her shoulder. "Step away from Mr. Vescari." "Let her speak," Ronan said quietly. He did not know why. Even later, he could not fully explain it. Some instinct, some flicker of recognition in her eyes. Not of him specifically, but of the same thing he had seen in the eyes of people who had narrowly survived. Something. She knew something. That much was clear. She was already moving, pulling him toward the narrow alley that ran along the left side of the restaurant building. He went. His guards followed, confused, weapons half drawn. They made it maybe 12 steps into the alley. The world behind them detonated. The blast hit like a wall, pressure, then heat, then sound, arriving in that order, each one almost too large to process. Ronan was thrown sideways into the alley wall, his shoulder taking the impact. His ears rang instantly, a high, flat tone that swallowed everything else. He tasted brick dust. Behind him, through the ringing, he could hear screaming from the street, and the sharp repeating crack of something secondary catching fire. He turned. His sedan was gone. Where it had stood, there was fire. The delivery truck that had been parked 30 meters up the road, the one he had barely noticed on arrival, had plowed directly into it. The impact alone would have finished him. The explosion had done the rest. Flames climbed the side of the building across the street. The restaurant windows had blown inward. People were running. Ronan stood in the alley, ears ringing, and stared. He had been thinking about pasta. They were inside. Her voice cut through the ringing. And he turned to find her a few feet away, pressed against the wall, watching the fire with wide eyes. Two men, sitting at the corner table near the window, the one with the view of the street. They came in 40 minutes ago and ordered nothing except water. I thought it was strange. Then I heard one of them say a name. She looked at him. Your name. What else did you hear? One of them said the car. He said, make it the car, not inside, cleaner that way. Fewer questions, she exhaled shakily. I didn't know who you were. Not until you stepped out and one of them stood up from the table. I knew I had to get you away from that car. Ronan looked at her for a long moment. A waitress. She had heard 2 words of a plan she wasn't supposed to hear, in a restaurant where she was just trying to finish her shift. And instead of doing the sensible thing, the safe thing, the thing any rational person would do, which was to stay far away from whatever this was, she had walked out those doors and put her hands on the most dangerous man in the city and told him not to talk. He almost said thank you. He didn't get the chance. At the far end of the alley, 2 men appeared, moving fast through the smoke and the fleeing crowd, scanning faces. Professional movement. Weapons not yet visible, but the shape of them obvious beneath their jackets. The assassins had survived, and they had just realized their target had too. Ronan pulled her further into the alley's shadow, his voice dropping to almost nothing. What's your name? She pressed herself against the wall, watching the men. Celeste. Celeste. He looked at the men, then back at her. You just made yourself very difficult to walk away from. She turned to look at him, and in the orange glow of the fire still burning behind them, he watched her expression shift from fear to something harder and more defiant. I didn't ask for easy, she said. He almost smiled. This was not the time. Stay close, Ronan said, and don't talk. She grabbed his arm again. Same grip, same confidence. That's my line, she said, and they ran. By midnight, Celeste had decided 3 things. First, she was not a criminal. Second, she wanted nothing to do with whatever world Ronan Vescari inhabited. Third, and most frustratingly, she had absolutely no idea how to leave. The safe house was not what she expected. She had imagined something dark and claustrophobic, peeling walls, bare bulbs, men with guns sitting in plastic chairs. Instead, the car had driven for nearly an hour through winding countryside roads before passing through iron gates and arriving at what could only be described as an estate, stone walls, manicured hedges, a main house with warm light in every window. The kind of place that belonged to someone who had been wealthy long enough to stop trying to prove it. She was given a room on the 2nd floor, clean towels, a change of clothes in roughly her size folded on the bed without explanation, a lock on the door that worked from the inside. She did not sleep. By morning, she was standing in the doorway of a large study, arms crossed, watching Ronan sit at a long oak table covered in documents, photographs, and open laptops. He had not slept either. She could tell by the set of his jaw and the stillness of him, not the stillness of someone resting, but of someone who had gone so far past tired they had reached a strange, focused calm on the other side. I want to go home, Celeste said. Good morning, Ronan replied without looking up. I'm serious. I helped you last night. That's done now. I have a job. I have an apartment. I have a life that does not involve, she gestured at the room, whatever this is. He looked up then. The 2 men from the alley, he said. We identified one of them this morning. His name is Decker. He works for an organization that does not leave loose ends. He held her gaze. You pulled a man away from a car bomb in front of witnesses. You are a loose end, Celeste. The silence that followed was not comfortable. She sat down. Fine, she said tightly, but I'm not staying 1 day longer than I have to. He nodded and returned to his documents. She watched him for a moment, this man who every newspaper in the city described as untouchable, ruthless, the invisible hand behind half the port's commercial operations and all of its darker ones. He looked right now like someone with too much paperwork and not enough coffee. What are you looking for? She asked. The leak. He said it simply, like it was obvious. Someone told them where I would be last night. The meeting at Portofino was arranged through 4 people I have trusted for years. One of them sold me out. Celeste said nothing. She thought about the 2 men at the corner table, how calm they had been, how they had ordered only water, because they did not plan to stay long. "I heard something else," she said slowly. Ronan looked up. "When I was clearing the table beside them, one of them said a name. A place, I think. Blackstone Yard." She frowned. "Does that mean something to you?" Something shifted in his expression, not alarm exactly, but a sharpening. He wrote it down. "It might," he said. She spent most of the day in the estate's small library, restless and irritated, and trying to read a novel she could not concentrate on. In the afternoon, she wandered to the window and watched the grounds. 2 men patrolled the perimeter. A third sat by the gate, all armed. Then she saw something that stopped her. A black car had arrived on the far side of the property. A man in a suit stepped out, mid-40s, tired-looking, and handed Ronan an envelope. They spoke quietly. The man in the suit looked distressed. After he left, Ronan opened the envelope, read whatever was inside, and stood for a long moment with his eyes closed. Then he walked back inside without hurrying. 20 minutes later, Celeste overheard 2 of the guards talking in the hallway. Apparently, a group of dock workers had been injured in a fire near the harbor. A secondary incident from last night's explosion. 3 families displaced, 1 man in critical care. She assumed Ronan would hear about it and do nothing. Men like him did not involve themselves in the consequences of their wars. That was what she believed. Which was why, at 6 that evening, she was entirely unprepared for what she saw through the study doorway. Ronan was on the phone. His voice was low, controlled. She caught fragments, the name of a private hospital, an account number, authorization for full coverage. Then a second call, a property manager, arranging temporary housing for 3 families. Then a third. He did not announce it. He did not look up to see if anyone was watching. He simply made the calls, closed the file, and moved to the next problem. Celeste stood in the hallway for a long moment after he had finished. She had walked into this house certain about exactly who Ronan Vescari was. She was becoming considerably less certain. She went back to her room, stared at the ceiling, and had the unsettling feeling that the story she had already written about this man was about to require some significant revisions. Outside, the night was quiet, but somewhere across the city, the traitor was still watching. Celeste had not agreed to come. That was what she told herself as she sat in the back of the dark SUV at 5 in the morning, watching fog roll off the river while Ronan's team checked weapons in silence. She had simply been awake when they were leaving, and when she mentioned Blackstone Yard, her Blackstone Yard, the name she had handed him like a stranger returning a lost wallet. Ronan had looked at her for a moment and then held the car door open without a word. That was not an invitation. It was an acknowledgement. She told herself there was a difference. Blackstone Industrial District sat at the eastern edge of the port, the part of the harbor that the city had quietly stopped maintaining sometime in the previous decade. Rusted cranes stood motionless against the gray sky. Warehouses with broken windows lined cracked roads. The whole place smelled of standing water and old iron. It looked, Celeste thought, exactly like somewhere people came when they did not want to be found. They went in through a side entrance, a corrugated steel door that one of Ronan's men opened in under 30 seconds with a tool she did not recognize. Inside, darkness. Flashlights came on. Ronan moved immediately to the interior. No hesitation, like a man who had searched enough buildings to stop being afraid of them. The warehouse was enormous and mostly empty, mostly. Near the back wall, behind a rusted shelf unit that had been deliberately moved and replaced badly, they found the room. It was not large, maybe the size of a generous walk-in closet. But every inch of it was covered, photographs pinned in grids, maps with routes marked in red, printed documents stacked and dated, a folding table with a laptop and 2 burner phones both dead. Celeste stepped inside and turned slowly, taking it all in. The photographs were all of Ronan. Ronan entering buildings. Ronan at a distance through what must have been a long lens. Ronan in cars, on phones, standing outside restaurants. Timestamps in the corners, stretching back 8 months. Someone had been documenting his every movement with the quiet patience of someone who was not in a hurry, because they knew eventually they would have their moment. This wasn't a decision someone made last week, Celeste said quietly. No, Ronan agreed. He was moving along the wall, reading documents, and his face was doing something she had not seen it do before. It was going carefully, deliberately neutral, the expression of a man absorbing something painful and refusing to show it. She looked closer at the documents on the table. They were not all about Ronan. Several referenced other businesses, a shipping company, a construction firm, a small private bank near the financial district. All legitimate operations as far as she could read. And next to each name, dates, incidents, a fire here, an audit there, a CEO who had resigned under sudden pressure. These businesses, she said, what do they have in common? Ronan crossed the room and looked over her shoulder. His silence lasted exactly long enough for her to understand it was not comfortable. They all refused, he said finally. Refused what? To cooperate with a financial network that launders money through legitimate infrastructure. Construction contracts, shipping routes, development loans. He picked up one of the documents. Someone has been systematically dismantling every business that wouldn't play along, and then acquiring what's left at a fraction of the value. That's not just crime, Celeste said. That's a takeover. Yes. She looked at the photos of him again. Months and months of patient surveillance, and felt something cold settle in her stomach. Ronan. She turned to face him. Whoever did this didn't just want you dead. They wanted to make sure you couldn't see it coming. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Something between respect and something more complicated. Start photographing everything, he told his team. All of it. They worked quickly. 15 minutes, maybe 20. Celeste was photographing a map with her phone when she heard it. A sound from outside, low and mechanical, the specific rhythm of multiple vehicle doors opening and closing in coordinated sequence. She looked at Ronan. He had already heard it. How many? He said quietly to the man nearest the entrance. The man pressed an earpiece. 4 vehicles, 12, maybe 14 men, mercenaries, moving too efficiently for anything else. They had been followed, or worse, the warehouse had already been watched, and someone had waited until they were inside. What followed was not a fight. It was a chase. They went down, through a hatch beneath the folding table that one of Ronan's men had found on entry, into the shipping tunnels below the district. Dark, low-ceilinged, smelling of rust and stagnant water. Flashlights, running footsteps, the echo of shouting from somewhere behind them. Celeste ran. She was fast, she had not expected to be, but fear does interesting things to a person's legs. She kept up, kept moving, kept her eyes on the flashlight beam ahead. Then the pipe caught her. She did not see it. A section of collapsed tunnel wall, jutting iron at chin height, her left leg hit it mid-stride and she went down hard, the sound she made sharp and involuntary. Pain. Real pain. She was up in 3 seconds, but 3 seconds was enough. She was falling behind when a hand grabbed her arm, pulled her upright without slowing, and kept moving. Ronan's hand. He had come back for her, not sent someone, come himself. He was half dragging, half supporting her now, and behind them the shouting was getting closer. But he did not let go, and he did not slow down. And he did not once look at the bag over his shoulder, the one containing evidence they had spent an hour collecting. At the tunnel's end, he made a choice without hesitating. He dropped the bag. All of it. Photographs, documents, everything. Left it in the dark. To get her out. Celeste said nothing as they emerged into the cold morning air, her leg bleeding and her breathing ragged. She said nothing as they reached the SUV and pulled away into the gray dawn. But somewhere between the warehouse and the safe house, something shifted inside her chest. Something she was not ready to name yet. The lodge sat at the edge of a mountain lake, so still it looked painted. Celeste had never seen water that color before. Deep green in the morning, turning silver by afternoon, going almost black at dusk. She spent the first hour simply standing on the wooden dock with her coffee, watching it change. And for a short while, managed to forget entirely that her life had been upended by an explosion she was never supposed to survive. The leg was fine, a deep bruise and a clean cut that one of Ronan's men had dressed properly. It hurt when she climbed stairs, but she refused to mention it, partly out of stubbornness, and partly because she had decided early that showing weakness in front of these people was something she would simply not do. Ronan had brought her here on the advice of an old ally, a man named Carver, who owned the lodge and asked no questions. The estate was too exposed now. Too many people knew about it. The lodge was off the grid in the truest sense, reachable only by a forest road that took 40 minutes to navigate at normal speed, and was, according to Ronan, not on any map that mattered. For the first 2 days, they barely spoke. Ronan worked at the kitchen table, calls, encrypted messages, whatever rebuilding of intelligence he could manage after losing the warehouse evidence. Celeste cooked, because the alternative was sitting still and thinking too hard, and she had never been good at sitting still. On the third morning, she went down to the dock before dawn and found him already there, fishing. She stopped at the top of the dock steps and stared. Ronan Vescari, the man whose name made shipping executives cancel dinners and made rival organizations move their operations to different cities, was sitting in a folding chair at the end of a dock, holding a fishing rod in the dark. "You're going to catch nothing at this hour," she said. "I know," he replied. "That's not the point." She came and sat beside him. Neither of them spoke for a while. The lake was perfectly quiet. Somewhere in the trees behind them, a bird was beginning its first tentative notes of the morning. "You fish a lot?" she asked. "I used to, with my father." He paused. "He died when I was 19. She looked at him sideways. "I'm sorry, it was not peaceful." He said it simply, without bitterness, the way people speak about old pain they have carried long enough to stop fighting. There was a war between two families. My father tried to stay neutral. Neutral in that world is just a slower way of losing. "And your mother?" 2 years later. Celeste was quiet for a moment. "So you took over?" "Someone had to." He glanced at her. "I was angry for a very long time. I made decisions I would not make now. But I also made sure it never happened to another family inside my organization. No one loses a father because he tried to stay neutral. Not on my watch." She thought about the phone calls she had overheard at the estate, the hospital bills, the 3 families. "Is that why you paid for the dock workers?" she asked. He looked mildly surprised, not that she had noticed, but perhaps that she had remembered. "They were hurt because of my war," he said. "Their families didn't choose that." Celeste looked out at the lake. The sky was beginning to lighten at the edges, the darkness going from black to a deep bruised blue. "My mother worked double shifts," she said after a while. "My whole childhood. I watched her run herself into the ground, depending on people who kept letting her down. A landlord who promised to fix the heating and never did. A boss who promised a promotion that went to someone else. A man who promised to stay." She shook her head. "So I decided very young that I would depend on nobody, not even for small things." "Is that why you work doubles?" She turned to look at him. "You noticed that?" "I asked," he admitted. "When we first arrived at the estate, I wanted to know who you were." She should have found that intrusive. Somehow she didn't. "I like standing on my own feet," she said. "It's the only ground I trust." He nodded slowly, like that made more sense to him than almost anything else she could have said. They fished until sunrise and caught nothing. And it was, Celeste thought, one of the most pleasant mornings she had experienced in recent memory. They shared meals after that, properly, at the table, not the silent parallel eating of the first 2 days. They talked about ordinary things, books, cities they had been to, foods they disliked. She made him laugh twice, genuinely, which surprised both of them. On the 6th day, she caught herself watching him from across the kitchen and quickly looked away. That evening, she stood on the dock alone and had a very firm conversation with herself about the situation. He was complicated. His world was dangerous. This was temporary. She had almost convinced herself when his phone rang inside the lodge. She heard his voice change register, that shift from ordinary to controlled, the same tone he had used in the alley. She was already moving toward the door when he appeared in it, his face carefully arranged into the neutral expression she now recognized as the one that meant something was very wrong. "Marcus is dead," he said. Marcus, his most trusted advisor, a man Ronan had known for 15 years. The traitor wasn't waiting anymore. Marcus had been found in his car outside his apartment building. No struggle, no forced entry. Someone he trusted had let them in close enough to make it quick and quiet, which meant the traitor was not working alone. They had reach, resources, and absolutely no intention of slowing down. Ronan received the news the way Celeste was beginning to recognize. He received all devastating things, with complete stillness, followed by precise, methodical action. No raised voice, no visible grief. Just a man immediately calculating the next move while quietly absorbing something that was clearly breaking him in places he would not show anyone. She found him at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, staring at a photograph. Marcus at some kind of company event years ago. Younger, laughing at something off camera. Ronan had his thumb over the edge of the photo, like he was considering putting it away but hadn't yet decided. Celeste put a cup of coffee in front of him and sat down across the table without being invited. He looked up. He did not tell her to leave. "Tell me about him," she said quietly, and he did. For almost an hour, Ronan talked about Marcus, how they had met when Ronan was 22 and furious at the world, how Marcus had been the first person to tell him directly that anger was a fuel that eventually burned the engine. How he had been the voice that pulled Ronan back from decisions that would have destroyed everything. A man who had no blood relation to Ronan but had functioned, quietly and without ceremony, as the closest thing to a father he had found since losing his own. Celeste listened. She did not offer comfort in words because she understood instinctively that he was not asking for comfort. He was asking to be heard. There is a difference. She had learned that the hard way. When he finished, he closed his hand around the coffee cup and looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Open, briefly, unguarded. "We need to find who's behind this," he said, "before anyone else gets hurt." The lead came from a name buried in documents that one of Ronan's analysts had partially reconstructed from memory after the warehouse. Fragments cross-referenced against financial records that a contact inside the Port Authority had quietly provided. An invitation to a charity gala. Grand Regent Hotel, 3 nights away. An annual event for the city's most prominent figures, politicians, executives, major donors. The kind of evening where people wore expensive clothes and talked about helping others while quietly doing the opposite. Several names on the guest list matched names from the warehouse documents, including one that Ronan stared at for a very long time without speaking. Adrian Vale. Celeste had heard of him vaguely, the way most people had. A billionaire. Old money expanded through smart investment, or so the official story went. Hospitals with his name on them, a foundation. A reputation carefully constructed over 2 decades to read as the kind of wealth that was almost respectable. "What do you know about him?" she asked. "Enough," Ronan said. "And not enough." He tapped the name. He was connected to 3 of those businesses in the warehouse files, but only at the edges, consultant arrangements, minor shareholding, the kind of involvement that's designed to disappear if anyone looks too closely. "You think he's more than an edge?" "I think," Ronan said carefully, "that the most dangerous people are always at the center of things that look, from a distance, like they have no center. They would go to the gala, undercover, gather what they could." Celeste did not point out that she was a waitress who had never attended anything requiring a gown, or that she had spent the last week living in borrowed clothes in a mountain lodge. She simply said yes. The Grand Regent was everything the Harbor District was not. Crystal chandeliers, string quartet in the corner, men in suits that cost more than Celeste's monthly rent, moving through the room with the casual comfort of people who had never once worried about a bill. She wore a deep green dress that one of Ronan's contacts had sourced, her hair up, her expression arranged into the polite blankness of someone who belonged there. She was surprised to discover she was good at this. Ronan worked the room with an ease that told her he had done this before. The controlled smile, the handshake that communicated exactly the right amount of warmth, the way he listened to boring men talk about themselves and made them feel fascinating. She drifted separately, picking up drinks she didn't finish, standing near conversations long enough to catch their edges. It was near the East Corridor, 40 minutes in, that she heard it. 2 men, partially behind a pillar. One she didn't recognize. The other was Adrian Vale, silver-haired, relaxed, holding a champagne glass like it was an accessory. She slowed near them without stopping, her eyes forward, her ears sharp. Vale was speaking in a low, pleasant voice that matched his public image perfectly. Vescari survived the harbor, the other man said quietly. Vale smiled, not concerned, almost amused. Inconvenient, he said, but temporary. The issue isn't eliminating him anymore. A brief pause. It's making sure everything he built goes with him. Celeste kept walking. Her heart was slamming against her ribs, but her face showed nothing. She crossed the room, found Ronan near the bar, and turned to stand beside him with her eyes forward, her voice barely a breath. "It's Vale," she said. "He's the one." She felt Ronan go very still beside her. Then Vale looked up from across the room, directly at her, and smiled. The smile was the worst part. Not threatening, not cold. Just the relaxed, unhurried smile of a man who had just spotted something interesting and had already decided what to do about it. Vale held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds, then looked away, returning smoothly to his conversation as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Celeste turned back to the bar. "I know," Ronan said quietly. "Don't move toward the exit yet. Give it 30 seconds. 30 seconds is a long time when someone like that is looking at you. 29 now." He picked up his drink without hurrying. "He won't move against you here. Too many witnesses, too many cameras. This room is his reputation. He won't dirty it." She counted the seconds in her head. Around 20, Vale said something to the man beside him, who quietly peeled away from the conversation and moved toward the far side of the room. Not toward them, toward the staff corridor, cutting off an exit. "We need to leave," she said. "Yes," Ronan agreed pleasantly, like she had suggested they try a different restaurant. Now, what followed was the strangest 4 minutes of Celeste's life, a slow, deliberate walk toward the main entrance while Ronan stopped twice to greet people he apparently knew, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, the picture of a man in absolutely no hurry. While somewhere behind them Vale's associate was repositioning, and Celeste was counting every step to the door with her jaw clenched. Then, 15 feet from the exit, Ronan did something she did not expect. He stopped, turned, and in a voice pitched just loud enough for the nearest cluster of guests to hear said, "Adrian, wonderful event as always." Vale, across the room, looked up. Every head nearby turned. The string quartet played on, oblivious. Ronan raised his glass slightly. A toast, pleasant, public, utterly ordinary. And Vale, with the practiced grace of a man who had spent decades managing appearances, raised his in return and smiled. 2 men acknowledging each other at a charity gala. 40 witnesses to the fact that nothing unusual had occurred. Ronan turned back to the exit and they walked out. In the car, Celeste exhaled for what felt like the first time in 20 minutes. "You did that on purpose," she said. "Made it public. If we disappeared from that room quietly, his people follow us into the street and the evening becomes complicated." He loosened his collar. "Now there are 40 people who saw us leave normally. Any move against us in the next hour is a move that could be traced back to him. You bought us time. I bought us tonight." He looked out the window. "Tomorrow is a different problem." The full picture took 36 hours to assemble. Ronan's team worked without stopping, pulling threads from the gala, financial records, shell company registrations, the names of Vale's associates that Celeste had memorized in fragments from overheard conversations. Piece by piece, the architecture of Adrian Vale's real empire emerged from beneath the charitable foundations and hospital wings. It was enormous. Banking institutions in 3 countries used as laundry cycles for criminal proceeds. Shipping routes that moved legitimate cargo on top and everything else underneath. Construction contracts awarded to companies that did not exist 12 months before the project began. Politicians whose campaign contributions traced back, through enough layers, to Vale's network. And at the center of it, going back 11 years, a single operation that Vale had tried to build and one person had destroyed. Ronan found the file late on the second night and went quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet. Celeste read it over his shoulder. 11 years ago, Adrian Vale had been the silent financial architect behind one of the largest human trafficking operations the region had seen. Not involved in the movement of people directly, Vale was never directly involved in anything. But the money, the infrastructure, the legal cover, all of him, The operation had been dismantled, violently and completely within a single week, by Ronan. "You knew about it?" Celeste asked carefully. "I found out." He set the file down. "One of the shipping routes ran through my port. The operators assumed, because of what I was, that I would look the other way." His jaw tightened. "They assumed wrong. You destroyed it. Every piece of it I could reach." He paused. "I was not gentle." Celeste looked at the file, at the scale of what had been dismantled, at the names of people who had been extracted from the operation's infrastructure and handed, anonymously, she noticed, to law enforcement agencies in 2 countries. "Vale lost millions," she said. "Vale lost more than money." Ronan looked up. He had spent years building that network. It was the foundation everything else was built on. When I tore it down, I didn't just cost him the operation. I cost him the trust of every major partner he had. He spent years rebuilding from that, and he blamed you. He has blamed me every day for 11 years. He said it without satisfaction. The harbor bombing wasn't business. It was personal. It has always been personal. Celeste sat with that for a moment. The strange, terrible weight of knowing that the reason she was here, the reason her life had been turned upside down, the reason she had run through tunnels and attended galas and slept in safe houses, traced back to a man doing the right thing a decade before she had ever met him. She opened her mouth to say something. His phone rang. He answered, listened, and the color, what little warmth the last 2 days had put back in his face, left it entirely. He lowered the phone. "They have Dara," he said. Celeste stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. Dara, her closest friend, the only person outside this world who even knew she was missing. Vale wasn't just coming for Ronan anymore. He was coming for everything Ronan cared about, and somehow, without either of them fully noticing, that list had come to include her. Ronan said no. He said it clearly, calmly, and with the particular finality of a man who considered the matter settled. Celeste would stay at the coastal estate with 4 guards while his team located Dara and extracted her through proper channels. It was not a discussion, it was a directive. Celeste nodded and said nothing, which should have been his first warning. She waited 3 hours, long enough for Ronan and his core team to leave, long enough for the remaining guards to settle into the rhythms of a quiet night. The rotation, patterns, the blind spots between camera angles she had spent 2 days quietly memorizing, the 7-minute gap between the guard change at the east entrance. She left through the east entrance. She had 3 things with her. Cash from an envelope she had found in an unlocked drawer. She told herself she would return it, knowing it was not the point. A phone she had borrowed from a guard who had left it charging unattended in the kitchen. And a name. Dara had called her 4 days ago. Before all of this, back when Celeste's biggest problem had been a double shift and a broken coffee machine at the restaurant. During that call, Dara had mentioned a man she was seeing, new, she had said. Works in shipping, she had said. Picks me up from work every night. Shipping. Celeste had barely registered it at the time. Now, she turned it over carefully as she walked through the dark toward the main road. Vale's network ran through shipping. His people were embedded in port operations across the city. A man who appeared suddenly in Dara's life right after Celeste disappeared from her own. That was not coincidence. That was positioning. They had been watching her before the harbor, maybe long before. It took her 2 hours and 3 different transit connections to reach the port district because she avoided the direct routes and paid cash and kept her face away from cameras the way Ronan had taught her without ever quite meaning to. The name she was looking for was on a freight company registered at the southern end of the harbor. One of the names from Vale's financial architecture she had memorized during the 36 hours of investigation at the coastal estate. A subsidiary so minor it barely appeared in the structure, small enough to be overlooked. Which was exactly why she thought it might be where they had taken Dara. The building was unremarkable. A 2-story administrative block attached to a larger warehouse. Lights on in 2 upper windows despite it being past midnight. She found a vantage point across the road in the shadow of a container stack and watched for 20 minutes. 2 guards at the entrance. Movement on the upper floor. At least 3 people, maybe 4. One shadow that stood too long at the same window, not moving. Someone in a room, not moving because they couldn't. Celeste pulled the borrowed phone and did something that felt both necessary and humiliating. She called Ronan. He answered before the second ring, and the first thing he said was not what she expected. South Harbor. Marin Freight Solutions. His voice was tight. I know. We tracked the same lead 20 minutes ago, and I have been trying to reach you for. A pause. Where are you? It was not a question. Across the road, she said. The silence that followed was brief and very loud. Don't move, he said. Do not go inside. I have a team 12 minutes away. There's someone at the upper window who hasn't moved in 20 minutes, Ronan. Celeste. 11 minutes, she said. I'll wait 11. She counted to 400. Then the side door opened from the inside, and she understood immediately that a guard rotation she hadn't accounted for was about to sweep her position. She moved. The building's interior was exactly what she expected. Industrial, functional, the bare infrastructure of an operation that was not meant to be examined. She stayed low and quiet and thought about everything she had absorbed over the past 2 weeks without meaning to. The way Ronan's men moved through unfamiliar spaces, the way they cataloged rooms, the way they always located the exits first. She found Dara on the upper floor. A locked room, but a simple lock, the kind that assumed the prisoner would not have a bent paperclip from the floor of the stairwell, which Celeste did, because she had seen one and picked it up with no specific plan, and was now very glad she had. Dara was frightened and furious and entirely unharmed. She had been taken as leverage, not as a target. Clean, cold calculation. What is happening? Dara whispered. Long story, Celeste whispered back. Walk now. But before she could move Dara toward the stairs, Celeste stopped. The room she had found Dara in was not just a holding room. It was also, apparently, a filing room. Stacked against the far wall, in 3 large crates, were physical documents, shipping manifests, transaction records, internal communications. The kind of paper trail that existed specifically because digital records could be deleted, but physical ones, stored in an unmarked room in a minor subsidiary, were considered safe. Dara watched her look at the crates. We're not leaving yet, are we? Dara said flatly. 2 minutes, Celeste said, already moving. She photographed everything she could reach. 40, 50 frames, moving quickly, hands steady. Dates, names, account numbers, routes. By the time Ronan's team came through the door 4 minutes later, Celeste was standing in the hallway outside the room with Dara beside her and a phone full of evidence in her hand, and 3 of Vale's men zip-tied, a pipe on the landing. She had no idea how to explain the zip ties. She had improvised. Ronan stopped in the doorway, took in the scene, looked at her. You waited 11 minutes, he said. I counted to 400, she said. That's close enough. Something moved across his face that was not quite anger and not quite admiration, and was entirely unmistakably both. The crates, she said, handing him the phone. Look at the crates. He looked, and for the first time since the harbor, Celeste watched Ronan Vescari smile, not the controlled public version she had seen at the gala, but a real one, sudden and brief, like something that had escaped before he could decide whether to let it out. Vale had hidden his evidence in the one place he thought no one would look. He had not accounted for a waitress who noticed everything. Vale moved first. That was the thing about cornered men with resources. They did not go quietly. They went loudly, expensively, and with the particular desperation of someone who had spent decades building something and could feel it finally, irreversibly slipping. The evidence from Marin Freight had taken 48 hours to process and verify. During that time, Ronan's team had worked alongside 2 federal investigators, men Ronan trusted, which Celeste now understood, meant men who had never accepted Vale's money, quietly building the legal architecture around what she had photographed. Account numbers cross-referenced. Shipping manifests matched against dates of known criminal incidents. Internal communications that named names, including names that appeared regularly in newspaper photographs at charity events. It was enough. More than enough. It just needed one more day. Vale did not give them one more day. The attacks came simultaneously across the city. 3 of Ronan's legitimate business operations hit within an 11-minute window. A warehouse fire near the port. A vehicle ambush on the East Highway. A building evacuation triggered by a called-in threat that turned out to be real. Coordinated, professional, designed to scatter Ronan's people and force his attention outward. And then Vale's private security force arrived at Vale Global headquarters and locked the building down. He was fortifying, destroying internal records, preparing to disappear into the legal and financial labyrinth he had spent decades constructing for exactly this contingency. Ronan made 2 calls, one to his team, one to the federal investigators. Then he looked at Celeste. "You should stay here," he said. "You should stop saying that," she replied. Vale Global headquarters occupied the top 6 floors of a glass tower at the edge of the financial district. Expensive, visible. The kind of building designed to communicate permanence. The kind of building that announced its owner intended to be here forever. The lobby was locked and guarded when they arrived. 2 of Ronan's vehicles had taken separate routes. A third had gone ahead to coordinate with the federal team, which was staging 3 blocks east and waiting on the final confirmation to move. They went in through the parking structure, a route one of Ronan's men had mapped during the investigation, using Vale's own shipping manifests, which had listed the building's service infrastructure in compliance documents. Even Vale's paperwork had become a weapon against him. The upper floors were not empty. Vale had kept 12 men inside, a mix of private security and the same mercenary contractors who had chased them through the tunnels beneath Blackstone. They were well armed, and they were protecting a man who had just told them their futures depended on the next 2 hours. What followed was not clean. It was loud and frightening and moved through 3 floors in a way that felt nothing like the action films Celeste had watched on quiet evenings. There was no elegant choreography. There was noise and smoke and the horrible compressed tension of moving through unfamiliar corridors, not knowing what was on the other side of the next door. Ronan kept her close, and she stayed close, and she did not pretend to herself that she was not afraid. But she kept moving. Vale's private office was on the top floor, and they found him there, standing behind his desk, jacket still perfectly pressed, the picture of composure. 2 guards flanked him. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city spread out in every direction, lit and indifferent. He looked at Ronan with the expression of a man who still believed, at some fundamental level, that situations like this resolved in his favor. Then he looked at Celeste. "A waitress," he said. The word was not quite contemptuous. It was something worse, genuinely dismissive, the tone of a man who found the whole thing faintly absurd. "He brought a waitress." "She brought herself," Ronan said. Vale's attention returned to Ronan with a thin smile. "You understand what you're walking into. Every lawyer I have is already mobilized. You have photographs and shipping documents. My legal team has buried more substantial cases than this before breakfast. Whatever you think you've built." "I already sent it," Celeste said. Vale stopped. She held up the phone. 40 minutes ago. The complete file. Federal investigators, 3 separate journalists, the Port Authority's Independent Oversight Board, and the Investment Committee of Vale Global's largest institutional shareholder. She paused. "I also sent it to the families of the people who were trafficked through your network 11 years ago. Because they deserve to know it first." The composure cracked. Not dramatically. Vale was too controlled for that. But around the eyes, something shifted. A rapid internal calculation playing out visibly for the first time. The legal labyrinth he had built assumed he could control the flow of information, assumed he would see any threat coming and have time to redirect it. She had sent it while they were still in the parking structure. By the time he had been standing behind his desk, projecting confidence, his empire had already begun collapsing. His phone lit up on the desk. He looked down at it. A notification from a financial monitoring service. Then another. Then 3 simultaneously. The institutional shareholder had already issued a public statement. 2 of his board members had resigned within the same minute. Vale sat down slowly in his chair, like a man whose legs had made a decision his pride had not yet approved. The guards looked at each other. Ronan's men looked at the guards. Nobody fired a weapon. Sometimes the fight ends not with a shot, but with a phone screen lighting up in a quiet room. Outside, they could hear it now. Vehicles in the street below, the organized movement of federal teams entering the building, radio communication crackling up through the floors. The investigators had been waiting for her confirmation that the evidence was live and public and irreversible before they moved. She had given it. Vale looked up at Celeste one final time. The amusement was entirely gone. "A waitress," he said again. But this time it sounded like something else. It sounded like a man finally understanding exactly how he had lost. Ronan said nothing. He crossed the room and, without looking back at Vale, put his hand briefly at the small of Celeste's back and guided her toward the door. Behind them, the first federal agents came through the stairwell entrance. The night Adrian Vale had spent 11 years, engineering had finally arrived. It just had not gone the way he planned. 3 months is not a long time. It is not long enough to fully rebuild what violence has damaged, or to untangle what years of careful corruption have woven into the fabric of a city. Federal investigations do not resolve in 3 months. Legal proceedings do not conclude. The slow, grinding machinery of consequence takes considerably longer than that to finish its work. But 3 months is long enough for some things. Long enough for a man to look honestly at the life he has built and decide which parts of it he still wants to carry forward. Long enough for the absence of immediate danger to reveal what was always underneath it. Long enough, Celeste had discovered, to understand that some things which begin in fire do not necessarily end there. The harbor had been repaired. The stretch of waterfront where the sedan had burned was clean now. The building across the street refinished, the cobblestones reset. If you did not know what had happened there, you would not know. The city had absorbed it the way cities absorb everything, with quiet efficiency and a short memory. Portofino had reopened 2 weeks after the investigation became public. The owner, a small, meticulous man named Giorgio, who had spent 30 years building his restaurant's reputation, had been quietly devastated by the damage to his dining room windows. Ronan had covered the repairs anonymously. Giorgio suspected anyway. He said nothing. Some things are understood without being said. Celeste went back to work on a Tuesday. She had not planned a significant return. No announcement, no moment. She simply tied her apron, clipped her hair back, and walked out of the kitchen with 2 plates of tagliatelle for table 4. And the familiar weight of the work settled back around her like something she had not realized she missed. Dara was at the bar when she emerged. She had positioned herself on the corner stool, with a coffee she was not drinking, watching Celeste with the expression of a person who had prepared a speech and was now reconsidering it. "You look annoyingly normal," Dara said. "I feel annoyingly normal," Celeste said, setting her empty tray under the bar, "which is either a good sign or a bad one. You dismantled a billionaire's criminal empire. I took some photographs and pressed send. Celeste, Dara." They looked at each other, and then Dara laughed. Properly the way she laughed when something struck her as both funny and absurd, which had always been Celeste's favorite sound. And Celeste laughed too, and for a moment the past 3 months compressed into something that felt almost manageable. Almost. Because underneath the normalcy, things had changed. She knew they had. She had changed. The woman who had burst through those restaurant doors 3 months ago, running on instinct, and terror was still her, the stubbornness intact, the self-reliance intact. But something had been added to it. A knowledge that the ground she had always insisted on standing on alone could, occasionally, hold 2 people. That was the part she was still working out. He came on a Thursday evening. The dinner service was winding down. 3 tables occupied. The kitchen running quiet, the harbor outside going gold in the last of the evening light. Celeste was wiping down the bar when she heard the door. She knew before she looked up. There are sounds that belong to particular people, a specific weight of footstep, a particular quality of presence that a room responds to before you consciously register it. She had learned his without meaning to. She looked up. Ronan stood inside the entrance in a dark coat. No bodyguards, no vehicle visible through the window behind him. Just a man in a restaurant, holding a small box, looking at her with an expression she had never seen on him in 3 months of dangerous situations and close proximity. Nervous. Ronan Vescari, who had walked into a charity gala surrounded by his enemies and raised a glass, who had stood in front of Vale's guards without flinching, who had absorbed devastating news with a stillness that could be mistaken for indifference, was visibly, undeniably nervous. She set down her cloth. He crossed the room and stopped at the bar, the same bar where 2 men had sat 3 months ago, ordering water and waiting for a car to explode. Different evening, entirely different man standing in it. "You didn't call," she said. "I wanted to ask you something in person." He placed the small box on the bar between them. Dark wood, no wrapping. "I've been thinking about what you told me on the dock, about standing on your own feet, about not depending on anyone. I remember saying it. I'm not asking you to stop." He held her gaze. "I'm asking you to consider that standing on your own feet and letting someone stand beside you are not the same thing, and that I am considerably better at being beside you than I have ever been at anything else." She looked at the box. "Open it," he said quietly. She did. Inside, on a small velvet square, was a key, brass, ordinary-looking, attached to a tag with an address 2 buildings down the harbor. She looked up. "A restaurant," he said. "Waterfront. The space has been empty for 2 years. I had it surveyed last month." A pause. "I thought if you were interested, we could build something that belongs to both of us. Something that starts with you." Celeste looked at the key for a long moment. She thought about the woman who had burst through those doors in a panic, who had grabbed a stranger's arm because it was the right thing to do, who had never once, in all the chaos that followed, lost herself. Not in the fear, not in the danger, and not in the man standing in front of her now. She picked up the key. It was warm in her hand, which made no logical sense, but there it was. "I have conditions," she said. "I expected nothing less," he said. She came around the bar. Outside, the harbor was quiet. The lights were coming on across the water, one by one, the way they always did at this hour, slow and certain, like something that had never been in any doubt. Ronan had survived a bombing, a betrayal, and a billionaire with 11 years of patience and infinite resources. None of it had changed him as much as a woman who had grabbed his arm and told him not to talk. He had listened. For the first time in his adult life, he was very glad he had.